dependence. And we were trained so skillfully that we now call this dependence being social, being healthy, being normal. But the loner, something in them resisted the training, or maybe the training just didn't take, or perhaps they underwent the training, spent years trying to need what everyone else needed, and then one day woke up to the fact that they'd been performing a role, playing a part, pretending to need something they didn't actually need. And once you wake up from that performance, you can't go back to sleep. You can't unknow what you've discovered. You can't force yourself to need validation when you've tasted the freedom of not needing it. Think about how we use language around friendship. We say we keep friends as if they're possessions to be maintained. We make friends as if they're products to be manufactured. We talk about losing friends as if they're objects that can be misplaced. We invest in relationships using economic metaphors that reveal what we're really doing, trying to secure returns on our emotional expenditures. All of this language exposes the transaction underneath. I'll give you attention if you give me attention. I'll validate you if you validate me. I'll include you if you include me. We're not actually connecting, we're trading. Trading emotional labor for the feeling of not being alone. But what happens when someone doesn't want to trade anymore? When someone realizes they don't need what you're offering because they've found something more valuable in their own company, they become incomprehensible, threatening, strange, because they violated the fundamental agreement that holds society together. The agreement that we all need each other, that we're all incomplete alone, that we all must participate in the endless exchange of validation to feel okay. The loner has broken the contract, not aggressively, not with any manifesto or rebellion, just by quietly discovering they never needed the contract in the first place. I want you to try something right now. Well, maybe not right this moment, but soon. Find a quiet place and sit there for 30 minutes. No book, no music, no planning what you'll do next. Just sit and notice what happens. For most people, the first thing that happens is discomfort, a restlessness in the body, an urge to do something, anything, to fill the space. The mind starts generating lists, things you should be doing, people you should be contacting, problems you should be solving. Then come the feelings. Anxiety, perhaps. A vague sense that you're wasting time. Maybe even a creeping loneliness, despite the fact that you chose to be alone. And underneath all of that, fear. Most people can't make it through those 30 minutes. They'll last 10, maybe 15 before they absolutely must check their book, do something to escape the silence. But the loner, they've learned to sit through the discomfort. Not because they're tougher or more disciplined, but because they discovered what's on the other side of it. On the other side of that initial discomfort is something extraordinary, a kind of clarity that simply isn't available when you're constantly processing other people's energy, expectations, and emotions. In silence, you stop performing. There's no audience, so the performance naturally drops away. And when the performance drops away, you meet yourself as you actually are, not as you want others to see you, not as you want to see yourself, but as you genuinely are. And here's what the loner discovered. That person you actually are. They're not bad. They're not broken. They're not insufficient. They're just different from the performance you've been maintaining. Maybe quieter than you pretend to be. Maybe less interested in things you've convinced yourself you should be interested in. Maybe more content with simplicity than you've let yourself admit. The loner sits in silence and learns to distinguish between authentic desires and trained desires, between genuine preferences and social programming, between what they actually enjoy and what they've been told they should enjoy. And this distinction is revolutionary, because once you know what you actually want, not what you're supposed to want, not what would look good to others, but what genuinely resonates with your being, you can't go back to pretending. You can't force yourself to enjoy parties that exhaust you. You can't maintain friendships that feel like obligations. You can't participate in conversations that feel hollow. You can't perform interest in topics that bore you, not because you're being difficult or antisocial, but because you've tasted authenticity and everything else now tastes like cardboard. Let me tell you what else happens in that silence. You start to notice the patterns, the repetitive thoughts that loop through your mind, the stories you tell yourself about yourself, the judgments you automatically make, the fears that drive your choices. Most people never notice these patterns because they're too busy, too distracted, too surrounded by noise. But in silence, these patterns become obvious. And when they become obvious, they lose their power. You notice that the voice in your head telling you you're not good enough isn't actually you. It's something you learned. You notice that the anxiety about what others think is optional, not inevitable. You notice that most of your mental activity is just conditioned response, not authentic insight. And slowly, quietly, without any dramatic transformation, you begin to disidentify from all of that noise. You realize you're not your thoughts. You're not your social identity. You're not the story you've been telling about yourself. You're the awareness that watches all of that. The consciousness that exists before thought, beneath identity, beyond story. And that consciousness, it doesn't need validation. It doesn't require company. It's not incomplete. It simply is. This is what the loner has accessed. Not through any special technique or spiritual practice, but simply by spending enough time alone that the noise settled and the truth became visible. Now we need to talk about why this is dangerous. Not dangerous to the loner, dangerous to everyone else. Every system of human organization, from families to corporations to governments, operates on a simple principle. People can be controlled through their need for belonging. Watch how a child is disciplined. The threat isn't physical pain, it's isolation. Go to your room. You're grounded. Nobody will want to play with you if you act like that. The punishment is always some form of exclusion from the group. Watch how adults are managed. Employees stay in jobs they hate because leaving means losing their professional community. People tolerate toxic friendships because having difficult friends feels better than having no friends. Individuals suppress their authentic opinions because expressing them might result in social rejection. The control mechanism is always the same. Behave, or we'll cast you out. Conform, or you'll be alone. Comply, or you'll lose your place in the group. This works beautifully until you encounter someone who isn't afraid of being cast out. Someone who has already spent time alone and discovered it wasn't the punishment they were taught it would be. Someone who has already been excluded and found that exclusion actually brought relief rather than suffering. Someone who has already lost their place in groups and realized they didn't need a place to begin with. What do you do with that person? You can't threaten them with isolation. They prefer it. You can't shame them with rejection. They're not seeking acceptance. You can't pressure them with social disapproval. They're not looking for approval. You've encountered someone who cannot be manipulated through the standard channels. And that makes them genuinely dangerous to any system built on social control. Not dangerous in the sense that they'll attack or destroy, but dangerous in that they might at any moment simply walk away. And their walking away might remind others that walking away is possible. Imagine you're in a room with 100 people and everyone is pretending to enjoy a terrible play. The play is boring, poorly acted, meaningless. But everyone is clapping, smiling, acting engaged, because that's what you do. That's the social agreement. Then one person stands up and walks out, doesn't make a scene, doesn't announce their departure, just quietly leaves. Suddenly, everyone else in the room becomes aware that leaving is an option, that you don't have to sit through the terrible play, that the social agreement is optional, not mandatory. And once people realize something is optional, some of them will choose not to do it. The system starts to break down, not through rebellion, but through simple non-participation. This is why groups punish the loner so severely. Not because the loner has done anything wrong, but because the loner's existence threatens the collective agreement that keeps everyone trapped in the theater watching the terrible play. The loner is living proof that you don't need what you think you need. That life continues, perhaps even improves, when you stop seeking what everyone else is desperately chasing. And proof is more dangerous than any argument. You can argue with someone's ideas, but you can't argue with someone's lived reality. They're standing right there, alone and content. And their contentment is undeniable. I've often said that the person who has nothing to prove is impossible to defeat, because defeat requires that you care about winning. Defeat requires that you're playing the game in the first place. The loner isn't playing. They've left the field. And from outside the field, they can see clearly what everyone inside the game cannot, that the game itself is optional, that the rules were made up, that the prizes aren't worth the cost of playing. And seeing them standing there outside the game, unburdened and free, makes everyone still playing question whether they want to continue. That questioning is what the system fears most. Here's something most people misunderstand. The loner isn't avoiding connection. They're seeking a different kind of connection, one that doesn't require them to abandon themselves in the process. Most of what we call connection is actually conformity, wearing a friendly mask. You connect by adopting the group's opinions, laughing at the group's jokes, caring about the group's concerns. You connect by becoming similar enough that others recognize themselves in you. But what if you're not similar? What if your genuine interests don't align with the group's interests? What if your authentic self would be rejected by the people around you? Then you have two choices: hide your authentic self and perform a false one, or be alone. The loner has chosen to be alone, not because they hate people, but because they've decided that their own company is preferable to performing a fake version of themselves for others. And here's what they discovered. Being with yourself isn't lonely when you're actually being yourself. It's only lonely when you're with yourself while wishing you were someone else. The loneliness people fear isn't the loneliness of physical solitude. It's the loneliness of internal division, being split between who you are and who you're pretending to be, between what you want and what you think you should want, between your authentic self and your performed self. The loner has resolved this division. They're no longer split. They're integrated, whole. And wholeness doesn't feel lonely. It feels complete. Let me give you an image. Imagine a house. In most people's houses, there are rooms they never enter, closets full of things they don't want to look at, basements they're afraid to explore, attics full of memories they'd rather forget. So they live in just a few rooms, keeping certain doors locked, certain areas off limits. That's what most people do with their own consciousness. They live in the approved areas, the thoughts they're allowed to think, the feelings they're allowed to feel, the desires they're allowed to have. And they keep whole regions of themselves locked away because those regions aren't socially acceptable. The loner, through spending time alone, has explored the whole house. They've opened every door, looked in every closet, descended into the basement, climbed into the attic. They've met every part of themselves, including the parts that society says should remain hidden. And you know what they found? Nothing that terrible. Some dusty memories, some unfashionable desires, some politically incorrect thoughts, some socially awkward feelings, but nothing that required them to remain split, to keep parts of themselves in exile, by accepting all of themselves, not just the presentable parts. They achieved internal integration, and that integration creates a sense of wholeness that doesn't need external completion. They're not looking for someone to fill their gaps because they don't experience themselves as having gaps. They're not seeking someone to complete them because they don't feel incomplete. This doesn't mean they have no flaws or that they're perfect. It means they've accepted their flaws as part of the package. They're no longer at war with themselves, no longer trying to be someone other than who they are. And when you're not at war with yourself, solitude becomes sanctuary, a place of rest rather than exile, a space of peace rather than punishment. From this place of internal peace, the loner can engage with others without need. They can enjoy company without clinging to it. They can appreciate connection without requiring it. And this creates a paradox. The person who needs connection the least often creates the most authentic connections, because they're not using others to escape themselves. They're meeting others from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. Let's talk about something nobody mentions: how much courage it takes to be unimpressive. We live in a world that constantly demands performance. You must be interesting. You must be achieving. You must be going somewhere, doing something, becoming someone. Standing still is treated like failure. Being ordinary is treated like a wasted life, and friendship has become part of this performance. Look at how people present their social lives. Every gathering photographed, every friendship displayed as evidence of a life well lived. The number of friends you have becomes a score, a metric, proof that you're winning at life. But the loner has opted out of this performance. They're not collecting friends to display. They're not accumulating social experiences to photograph. They're not building a network to leverage. They're just being, ordinarily, quietly, without fanfare. And there's something deeply courageous about that, about being willing to be nobody in particular, about choosing a simple life that doesn't make for good stories, about being content with experiences that nobody else witnesses or validates. Our world has trained us to believe that unwitnessed experiences don't count, that if nobody saw it, it didn't really happen, that if nobody validated it, it wasn't worthwhile. But the loner has discovered something profound. The most meaningful experiences are often the ones nobody else witnesses. The quiet moment watching light move across a wall, the sudden understanding that arrives in silence, the peace that comes from simply being alive without needing to justify or explain or share. These experiences don't make for interesting conversation. You can't photograph them. They won't impress anyone. But they're real, perhaps more real than the curated, performed, photographed experiences that everyone else is collecting. The loner has chosen reality over performance, authenticity over approval, being over seeming, and that choice requires courage, because it means disappointing everyone who expected them to participate in the performance. It means being seen as less social, less successful, less impressive by people who measure life in metrics the loner no longer cares about. I remember once hearing someone ask, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, does it make a sound? But the more interesting question is, if you live a life that nobody else validates, does it still have value? The loner's answer is yes, absolutely yes. In fact, a life lived for your own genuine satisfaction might be more valuable than a life lived for others' approval. Because at the end of your days, you're the one who has to look back on your life, not your friends, not your social circle, not the people who were impressed or unimpressed by your choices, just you. And the loner has decided to live a life they can look back on with honesty. A life where they didn't betray themselves for acceptance. A life where they didn't perform a false self to avoid rejection. A life where they remained true to their actual nature, even when that nature didn't fit social expectations. That's not antisocial. That's not broken. That's integrity. Here's what happens when you meet a loner who has truly integrated their solitude. You feel strangely calm around them. There's no pressure. They're not trying to impress you or get something from you. They're not performing or managing your impression of them. They're not anxious about whether you like them, because they're genuinely indifferent to whether you like them. And paradoxically, this indifference often makes them more likable, because people can sense when they're not being manipulated. They can feel when someone isn't trying to extract validation from them. And that absence of agenda creates a kind of spaciousness that's rare in human interaction. The loner isn't trying to convince you of anything, isn't trying to convert you to their way of living, isn't trying to prove that they're right and everyone else is wrong. They're just being themselves, and their self-acceptance gives you permission to be yourself too. This is the quiet revolution the loner represents, not a revolution of ideas or politics or social movements, but a revolution of simply being without apology, of existing without seeking permission.